Hello and welcome to Book by Book. Now, if this is the first time you're joining us, this is the place where we have the joy of meeting Jesus in all the scriptures. My name is Steve Nichols, and it's great to have you with us for study number 7 on the book of Deuteronomy. Are you under pressure? Always in a hurry? Many of us are, cutting corners, slaves to our phones, often full of anxiety. This can have an impact on our moral and our spiritual life as well. And in today's study, we're going to learn how our lives can be ordered and have an integrity that honours the Lord. With me today for our study are Dr. Sunil Raheja, psychiatrist, coach and author, originally from a Hindu background, but a follower of Jesus now for many years, and Dr. Paul Blackham, church planter, church minister and theologian. We're going to dive straight into our Bible, so if you have one there, please turn to Deuteronomy chapter 22 and we'll read from verse 9. Do not plant two kinds of seed in your vineyard. If you do, not only the crops you plant, but also the fruit of the vineyard will be defiled. Do not plough with an ox and a donkey yoked together. Do not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together. Make tassels on the four corners of the cloak you wear. Wow, interesting reading.
Yeah.
Paul, Deuteronomy 22 opens with a whole range of wisdom on how to live. What's all this about? What connects all these different laws in this chapter?
Yeah. And sometimes the bit like that you read, and it has a thing about don't wear clothing that has like two different kinds of cloth in the same piece of clothing. That sort of thing is often what people read if they want to mock the Bible. And then if you say, oh, I think it's important to tell the truth, or I don't think you should steal, and they'll go, oh, are you wearing clothes with different kinds of cloth? And they're thinking, they think they're clever, remember it. And I'm saying, but what is that law about? Well, you've asked me. The thing is, it's all of this is to do with what we might call this boundaries, and integrity and boundaries. And it's about the crops and things. Now, at one level, so the Lord's, what we tend to do is mush everything up into chaos in life, and we don't have boundaries, and we don't have integrity. And the Lord is trying to give them physical, like, boundaries that is constantly making them think, am I, like, single-minded? Or am I double-minded? Am I living in chaos, or am I living in a certain sort of order with proper boundaries? And so actually, like, don't plant two kinds of seed in your vineyard. It's like, all farmers know it's much more efficient to have a field that's just potatoes. So if you're like, I'm going to have potatoes and cabbages and have a few tomatoes in there, well, that's an incredibly difficult way to farm. All of it actually makes common sense. A piece of clothing that's 100% cotton is like the best quality, or 100% something. Whereas if you go, it's cheaper clothing if it's like mixed integrity. So we kind of all know this. We all know this to be true. But the Lord's actually just saying, I want you to live a kind of life so that all the things you do, farming and eating and getting dressed, will be subtly reminding you, don't live in chaos. Don't run over boundaries. Try to have things in an ordered, thought through, logical way of life, because it's not just that I'm bothered about how you do your crops and your cooking and things. I'm really wanting this to be the kind of character of your heart and mind, that you have integrity, a single-mindedness, and you're just not living in chaos.
So helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Sunil, if I can turn to you. Yes. Chapter 22, verse 5, a woman must not wear man's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing. I mean, these kind of verses jump out at us today particularly, don't they? What's the Bible's wisdom, can you tell us, for people who may feel they don't fit the stereotypes in society of gender?
Yes, and again, I think it goes back to Paul's comment about God has created an order and a system that needs to be respected. And so when we look at a passage, Deuteronomy 22 verse 5, that appears so out of sync with our culture and our age and our way of thinking, what's it saying is, again, as Paul was saying, is that God is a God of order. And in the same way as there's day and night, in the same way that there's right and wrong, there is male and female. And, the fascinating thing, talking, as someone who's a doctor as well, is every single cell of your body is either XX female or XY male. Every single, you have billions of cells, and within every cell, that blueprint is there. Now, some people say, what about things like intersex and people well, intersex is at 0.02%. It's tiny. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation going around. But the reality is, when you look at the science, they're categories. And again, it goes back to this issue, is that God has made categories. I think one of our challenges that we have in our modern world is because of technology and because of the power that technology gives us, we can blur those boundaries. And we can blur that, as a simple example, because of our smartphones and our computers, I can be working 24/7. I can be I can be working at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can be sleeping at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, we can mess things up, but we weren't created that way. And it's again, we in a previous study we talked about don't remove an ancient boundary stone. Well, these are, if you like, boundary stones that God has put, and dangers and consequences arise when we break them, and they will. And again, if I choose to an example, if I buy a new car and instead of putting petrol in the car, I put water, and if I drive it at first gear, at 50 miles an hour, what's going to happen? Okay, I'm not respecting the order and structure that the manufacturers made the car.
Yeah.
Now, if I go and break the order that God has made, I'm going to spoil everything. And so we are made for order. Everything, Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything under the sun. That's the way we're made. But again, I think the problem is because we have the power now to change things, we somehow, as it were, using another metaphor, throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just think, well, we can just blur everything. Well, we blur everything, we will suffer consequences.
Our culture views of gender stereotyping can actually be quite oppressive and narrow, can't they?
Well, yes, that's a great point. Sorry.
When you say,
I mean, that is a thing, because like the law, it's funny because he has proper boundaries, like it says male or female. But what often people get concerned about, they'll say like, well, this is what a man's supposed to be, and I don't really feel that way. That doesn't fit me. And it's like, yeah, but God, the Bible doesn't have these ludicrous views of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. Like, there's these biological realities, but the Lord's like, don't feel you need to live up to cultural pressures and imagine, this is what I imagine a woman should be like. And it's like, no, the Lord's like, no, just be what you are. Be what you are, and
within the confines that He's given you.
He's given these boundaries, but but human ideals and things, they're the problem.
Well, it's like a fish is called to live in water. A fish says, well, I don't like the boundary of water. I want to live on land. It's not going to survive very long.
Yeah.
A train is made with tracks, and it can travel on the tracks. Well, we're made with the boundaries of male and female. But as you said, there's huge variety. The jobs and things. In the Bible, there are men doing embroidery. There's
women warriors.
There's women, women warriors. There's that huge variety that God gives, and God gives us incredible freedom within the boundaries He's created. The problem is, humanly speaking, I think so often we resent that, and we want to create the boundaries, and that's where we become unstuck.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Sunil. Paul, can I press you a little bit more on the end of chapter 22? It's such a serious view of human sexuality.
Yeah.
What's the wisdom here for our modern life?
So it's like another boundary line, that the Lord has this boundary that I guess in the modern world, sexuality is not taken that seriously. It's something like, it's almost, sometimes it's almost just like a recreational pursuit.
It's an appetite.
Or just a mere desire.
Yeah.
Whereas here, there's the boundary is marriage between a man and a woman. And the Lord's like, now inside that boundary, yes, sexual expression and activity. Outside of that, no, not in the church community. And again, what comes with that, it's almost like sexual activity is like a matter of life and death here. Yeah. It takes it that seriously. And for a modern, we're like, what? It's as seriously as life and death. It is to the Lord God, because it's such a deep thing about human beings. And as we read through the whole Bible, we know it's actually got something to do with spiritual, eternal things about Christ and church. So this view of sexuality and virgin and things, and it's as if to say, the Lord's like, yeah, you don't actually have to be sexually active at all. And the Bible has this idea that there's a kind of, because go through Christian history, and often our ancestors would write about virginity and things, and we're like, oh, why are they always going on about that? Well, because there's this vision that Jesus has about being a eunuch for the kingdom of God. And the Apostle Paul says, actually, if you're a celibate single person for the kingdom, you can know a devotion to Jesus that married people cannot know, because married people have to be concerned with each other. When there's a kind of, so all the way through here, there's a kind of vision of human life and sexuality that's very high and includes this kind of passion and devotion to the Lord himself.
That's the key point. I think the Bible's view of sex is so high, whereas the world's view of sex is so low. Sex is seen as an appetite, as you said earlier on, which is separate from the consequences. So sex is something I just enjoy, like I might enjoy some food, and that's it. And then there's nothing more to it. But no, the Bible's saying sex is deeply, there are huge consequences. And I think because of technology, we can separate it out. Contraception. I'm not saying contraception is wrong. It's a gift. But what the danger is, that what that means is that the Bible is saying that it's a bit like sex is. The analogy I find helpful is like a fire. Sex is within monogamous marriage between a man and a woman. It's like it's the fireplace. So within a fireplace, that fire can warm the house. It provides much comfort. It can provide much warmth. It provides a wonderful blessing. But you take the fire out of the fireplace, you can burn the whole house down.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's, again, the importance of the boundary.
Yeah.
You take it out. And unfortunately, what we've done is we have taken sex out of the boundaries that it was intended for. And now we're getting, and again, it's a private act between two individuals, and it's nobody else's business. Well, no. Sex leads, it can lead to children, it can lead to abortion, it leads to
public consequences.
Children growing up without parents, and all the ramifications that we have because we have neglected. Sex is the glue that holds the family together, and yet what do we have? We have a societal breakdown as a consequence of that.
Marriage and sexual activity within the marriage is a picture of something much bigger, isn't it? Of the union of Christ and his church.
Yeah.
So
such a high calling.
As we go on to chapter 23, Paul, why is there so much care about who can join the ancient church? Who's in, who's out?
Yeah, again, it's because at first it sounds as if it's almost like, we don't like Ammonites, we don't like Moabites. And it sounds almost like they've got this sort of almost like racist thing against foreigners. And it isn't that. Because actually, when we read through in Exodus, when there was the Exodus, people of all kinds of nationalities were part of the Exodus. And if we look at the names and backgrounds of people in the law and in the histories, they're people from all the nations, Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites, all these kinds of things. So what the point is what is that person's identity? So he's really saying a person cannot join church if their identity is to be a pagan.
Yeah.
So he's like, I want Ammonites, Moabites, Edomites, all these things can join church, but they cannot remain with their old non-Christian identity. We still say that to people. They say, we want you to join church, but if you're going to join church, it's a new identity. It's a new life for you. Now the center of your life is Christ and church. That's your true family. Well, if a person says, well, I want to go to church, but I'm going to carry on being, say, a Muslim, or I'm going to carry on. Well, no, you can't do that. Like it's one or the other. Jesus is not an option. He's the option. You can't have him alongside other identities. He's your whole identity, or you can't have him at all. That's really what's being said. It's like, all the nations are welcome in, but as you join, you leave your old identity and get this new identity of I'm born in Zion.
You die to self and rise with Christ.
Yeah.
Powerful. Yeah.
So no, we're thinking about the life of the church family in these verses. Chapter 23, verses 15 to 23, we get a vision of the church family as a way of freedom, purity, integrity, generosity, and so on. Why is it important for the church to show off this radical wisdom to the world around?
Yes, so these passages here, they're talking about treating each other with honour and respect, about really growing as a family of love. And it's a fulfillment of, treat your neighbour as you would rather, love your neighbour as you would love yourself. And it's showing the radical love and countercultural nature of God's people and God's community. And again, if you're going to have that, you're going to have boundaries. And as Paul was saying, you can't do a mix and match. You can't say, well, I'll worship my pagan god over here, and then I'll bring I'll cheat somebody within my family member here. And obviously, you can't do those kind of things. You've got to show that distinct difference, because this is a countercultural community. And again, if you take the original vision that God has for his church, for his community, for his people, it's that they would show off what that looks like to the world with all its brokenness. And that, not to say that churches or Christians or God's people are, again, you only have to read the Bible to see how messed up they are, but they are on a journey of transformation. That's the key thing. I'm on this transformation journey.
Wow.
Sunil, can I press you a little bit more on that?
Yes.
Caring for the vulnerable, the needy, the poor is such a big part of the Lord's vision for his people.
Absolutely, yes.
How do we see that in Deuteronomy 24?
Yeah, so what it's emphasizing again in this new community is the fact that ultimately, under Christ, under God, we are all equal. It's not about one is, somebody may have more money, may be richer. Somebody may not have a biological family, they may be an orphan or a widow. But under him, we have that equality together because we are equally valuable. And so we need to learn that there isn't that discrimination, or there isn't that ranking system or a pecking order that somehow or other somebody's is at a higher caste or at a higher level than anybody else. No, before God, all of us are sinners in need of grace, in need of his love and his transformation through Christ.
And can't take advantage of people because they're poor or in difficulties. Make sure people
which is
are
so
looked
easy,
after.
which is the way of the world. The world will do that. It will seek to create this pecking order, and those who are stronger will seek to exploit the weaker. That's the natural tendency. But God says, no, in my family that doesn't happen. We all have different roles and responsibilities, and there's great variety there, but it's not a place of exploitation.
Yes.
And it's such an attractive thing to see, isn't it, when it happens and people are drawn in.
And I think that's one of the beautiful things, in a sense, you have people of ages, of genders, who are able to relate and connect to each other in freedom and genuine love and concern for one another. And it's powerful.
Paul, just staying in chapter 24, looking back a little bit to the first few verses about marriage. Man marries a woman, she becomes displeasing to him and so on. How does this fit in with the rest of the Bible's teaching about marriage?
I know, because it's like he's actually giving rules for divorce. And Jesus, when he comments on this, says, look, that is hardness of heart. That is not what I would wish. I wish in the church there were no problems in marriage ever. But then he says, but look, if things go really bad, there is a possibility of divorce. He describes this, but then it's interesting that he's very careful with these law, that it's like what you can't have is divorce, have the ex-wife then married off to somebody else, then divorced and then come back and get married again. Because that sort of thing does happen in different cultures and religious traditions. And suddenly you're into really messy exploitation of things. So it's like, no, because of the hardest heart, because it's a fallen world, things can go wrong. But if it's going to be done, even that should be done with a proper integrity and making sure no one's going to be exploited or taken advantage of, even in when things go wrong in a marriage. Yeah.
Thank you. And just sort of extending that a little bit, Sunil, the dignity and the value that each person has extends to the laws of punishment here. And even animals must be respected, and workers deserve to be paid properly and so on. What's the wisdom here from the Lord for us in the modern world?
Yes, I think, again, it's the sanctity of life. It's about the value of human life, the value of of creation, of animals and the world he's given us, needs to be treated with dignity and respect. And so any kind of punishment that degrades a person doesn't get, in a sense, is dangerous. You don't fight evil with evil. If you start, again, if you think about the communities around, if you steal my land, then I'm going to destroy and butcher you. It sets limits to retribution. with an understanding of justice. And so those boundaries are really important, because the danger is that when there's revenge, the revenge then gets out of control, as it were, and the medicine becomes worse than worse than the actual condition itself. And that's why you get this spiraling of revenge and counter revenge and more and more violence.
And it's often why Christians have been so involved in crime and punishment and prison reform, because you can't just say, because the state might go, well, stick them in prison forever. And Christians are like, well, hang on. The law, you cannot dehumanize a person and destroy them in punishing them, because you've got to love them and find out how to keep them with integrity and respect, even when they're a criminal and you're punishing them. Christians have been a voice for that all over the world down through the ages.
Because again, no matter, so long as a human being is alive, there is a spark of humanity in there. And so you need to respect that humanity that's there. And the other obviously thing about, as you were mentioning, about creation and animals. And interesting, there's our world is so full about creation care now. But fascinatingly, it's there in the Bible. It's there thousands of years ago, about treating animals with respect, treating the land that you've been given with respect. And, you know, again, C.S. Lewis got this lovely quote, which I like. He says, "Man with dog closes a gap in the universe." That we've been given dominion of this creation, and we're called to steward it and take care of it. And unfortunately, I think Christians have lost that vision, lost that picture. But we're rediscovering it again. But it's there in the scriptures.
It's
If
all of
only
life.
if only we would read our Bibles more carefully.
We've just got a few moments left. Why is it important to apply the kingdom of God to, well, business life, commercial life as well?
Because it's there in chapter 25 and verse 13. Don't have differing weights in your bag, different measures, accurate, honest measures. The Lord loves that. He detests dishonesty in business. So again, that integrity where people should be able to say, oh, I'm dealing with a Christian. I know they're going to be absolute integrity and honesty. And that idea of like, oh, I've got some weights that are good for me and some that and all that. Say, no, absolutely be straightforward all the time in business, because that is a tremendously powerful witness. Because people who aren't Christians, it's very easy to cut corners and not be honest and not have integrity. And the Lord's makes a big deal of it.
And I suppose, and that comes from understanding that God is God of everything. You know, I think somebody said that there's no blade of grass that Jesus does not say, that is mine. Everything is under him. His are the eyes that sees and knows all things. I think it's in the prayer, isn't it? It's him to all eyes are open and all desires known. Everything. Nothing can be hidden from him.
So all of life should be a reflection of his truth, integrity, character, order, and so on. He's a God of order. Yeah, that's so helpful. So Neil, Paul, thank you as always for joining in this discussion today.
Thank you.
Summing up the various regulations in these chapters then, the key truth seems to be there needs to be a bounded integrity to everything we do. We probably all know people whose lives can only be described as chaotic. They may have great gifts or wonderful opportunities, but there's no centre or purpose to their lives. Followers of Jesus are not immune. Some Christians never mature, never see fruit in their own lives or the lives of those they're closest to. I came across the example of Samuel Taylor Coleridge recently. He was one of the so-called romantic poets of the 18th, 19th centuries, a friend of William Wordsworth. One writer said about him, "Never did so great a mind produce so little." He left Cambridge University to join the army, but he left the army because in spite of all his learning, he couldn't care for his own horse. He returned to Oxford, but left without a degree. He started his own newspaper, but after just 10 editions, it stopped. He had great visions of what he was going to do, but was so caught up in the dreams that he never achieved any of them. God's first rule in the cosmos is order. And for us to live in a way that pleases him, our lives need to have an order and integrity too. We don't have to have a diary. Plenty of people in the world have never seen one. It's more about knowing the centre and main purpose of our lives. So just think, why has Christ put me here? Who am I becoming as a person? Let everything else be shaped around that. Lord, help us to live as children of eternity with integrity, grace, and truth in all that we do today. For your name's sake. Amen. Until next time, God bless you and goodbye.